This video will take you through my process of unpacking a particular text. This one is a web-based campaign by an organisation called Story of Stuff Project. Now, what I recommend that you do is that you get hold of this article. I've put a link to it on the Facebook description, and so you should be able to get hold of your own copy of it. In a second, I will read the entire document before I give any analysis or anything. I'm just going to read it all the way through. It goes for about 5 minutes. If you've already read the document or you want to skip that, you can go forward, but you do need to read the whole document, I think, first before you get going. And I'll pick it up after I've read it, and you'll see this image again of the Coca-Cola, giant Coca-Cola guy and the straw and that. You'll see that when I start to pick up the analysis. What you'll find is that I'm focusing here on a process for working your way through a text and how you kind of knit the whole thing together. And you notice that there's not a lot of discussion of persuasive techniques until towards the end of the video, where I give you advice on exactly how you can put the whole thing together. So it is a little bit long, but there is a bit of a process involved too that I think once you've got the hang of that process, it makes the whole thing a lot better. So bear with me a little bit with this, and do get your own copy of that document. I'm also uploading a link to the Word document with all the tables and the information and all that sort of stuff in it, so you can get a copy of that as well. All right, I hope you don't mind the video, and thanks for tuning in. This is just a basic reading of the text. I'm scooting right over the top of all the arguments and all the persuasive techniques, just so that we've got an overview of it. First thing is the background information. In October 2014, the website of the Story of Stuff project featured a campaign. This campaign is reproduced on the following double-page spread. This is how the Story of Stuff project describes itself on its website. The Story of Stuff project's journey began with a 20-minute online movie about the way we make, use and throw away all of the stuff in our lives. 5 years and 40 million views later, we're a community of 750,000 change makers worldwide, working to build a more healthy and just planet. We invite you to watch and share our movies, participate in our study programs, and join our campaigns. Come on, let's go. And now the text begins with the title, Coca-Cola's Attack on Medihganj Villages, and an image of villagers protesting for fresh water, saying it's their birthright. It begins. And you'll see just there, very prominent on the page is a signed petition panel where you put your name, address. It's already pre-populated for Australia and has the signatures there. It says, tell the Coca-Cola company, respect Medihganj villagers' right to clean water and follow the Pollution Control Board's order to close your operations there immediately. Coca-Cola is determined to drain the village of Medihganj, India dry, despite a government order to shut down the plant for using too much water and violating pollution limits. According to Indian authorities, the groundwater level in the village has gone from safe to overexploited, the worst designation of groundwater before it dries up completely in the time the Coke plant has been operating. Medihganj villagers have been protesting against the Coke plant for years. The villagers' protests have escalated as their wells have dried up, forcing them to walk ever greater distances for fresh water. As the water level drops, crop yields are dropping with it, sucking out the economic basis of the village and endangering livelihoods for thousands of residents. Meanwhile, Coke has spent much of this year pressing for a massive expansion of the plant that would increase water use by 5 times. The company has shown that it is totally disconnected from the danger it is imposing on the village. Studies conducted by both the Indian government agencies and independent organisations have found that Coke has located many of its plants in water-stressed areas of India, and bottling operations in these areas have threatened groundwater in many places. Furthermore, Coke plants have also been caught polluting the surroundings and selling toxic waste to suspecting farmers to be used as fertiliser. After years of watching groundwater levels drop dramatically, Medihganj villagers finally have Coca Cola on the defensive. One villager, 60-year-old Savitri Rai, says police beat her when she first began protesting the plant a decade ago. In June this year, under pressure from the community, the government ordered the Coke plant to be shut down for a number of violations. Coke has appealed the closure in the courts and has been allowed to temporarily operate while the courts consider the appeal. Meanwhile, a massive expansion that Coke had been planning, which would greatly expand the rate at which it sucked up Medihganj's water, was permanently denied. While there is no denying Coca-Cola's enormous set of resources, we have people power on our side. In joining in solidarity with the people of Medihganj, our community can influence global public opinion and help villagers secure access to clean, safe local water. Water is becoming an increasingly scarce resource around the world. Many corporations argue that they are free to use as much water as they want, even if it makes entire areas uninhabitable. Careful stewardship of our resources is at the heart of our story, ensuring that we'll be around to continue telling stories long into the future. The Story of Stuff project works to draw connections between the cycle of production and consumption and its impact on society. By joining in the stories of communities such as Medihganj, we can help illuminate the impact that corporations like Coca Cola have on people's lives. Coke tries to bill itself as a socially responsible company, but our community has the power to expose its dirty practices to customers worldwide, bringing much needed pressure for positive change. When our community unites behind a cause as important as this one, we can create a force that can't be ignored. Okay, so that's the end of the text, and just giving you another look at that image in case you're trying to find this part of the video again, obviously showing a villager, a vulnerable villager, having the well sucked dry by the corporate giant Coke. Okay, so this video is now going to take you through how I would go about analysing a text such as Coca-Cola's attack on Medihganj villages. So the first thing I would do as part of my analysis would be to identify some of the basic features of the text. You really need to know what the issue is that the writer's concerned with, and in this case they're interested in, the issue is the behaviour of Coca-Cola in relation to water resources in India, and probably that is part of a bigger issue of the behaviour of corporations around the world in relation to local communities and the environment. So now you know what the issue is. You look for the stance of the writer, and it's important to understand that the stance in this case is critical of the behaviour of Coca-Cola and distrustful of corporations generally. So stance is a kind of a basic position on an issue. So the purpose is really important to understand as well. And to understand the purpose, you probably need to go down the step below, which is audience, and figure out who the audience is. So in this case, the audience for this text is more than likely people who hold concerns about the environment and about social justice issues around the world already. So generally speaking, a more aware, socially interested readership, people who probably have some kind of global perspective already. Certainly they would be users of the internet, and even though in the olden days we used to say users of the internet, younger people, I don't know that that really holds true anymore, but generally they certainly wouldn't be an older group by nature. They might include some older people, of course. So the audience, internet users, people interested in the environment and social justice issues. The purpose then is, knowing who the audience is, the purpose is then to build the specific campaign around Coca-Cola and against Coca-Cola and to support the villagers. And it's also at the same time to build the activist base of the Story of Stuff project and involve people in these kinds of online campaigns generally. So it's got a dual purpose there as well. So the contention, similar to the stance, is the writer's point of view on the issue, but in this case, the contention is often much more specific. And in this case, I think the contention is that the reader should join the Story of Stuff's campaign to force Coca-Cola to act more responsibly in relation to water resources in India. And I've got that there twice. I'm not sure why, except that it's important that you know exactly what the contention is here. And here this article is not about trying to campaign to Coke to change their behaviour or campaign to the Indian government to change its behaviour. The contention here is for the readership to get involved in this campaign. That's who the audience is, and the purpose is to get them involved in the campaign. The contention, therefore, is the position, the point of view they want the reader to adopt by the time they finish reading the text, and that is that they should join the campaign and get involved. Okay, all right. It's not possible to find the arguments generally until you know what the contention is, but now that we know what it is, we need to go and look for the main arguments or reasons that are given by this writer to support the contention. So the way that I teach students to do this is to go through the text and read it a second time and first of all, look for when the writer stops talking about one thing and starts talking about a new idea. And sometimes at first you may not be able to figure out exactly what they're saying or why, but you can tell that they've changed from one topic to another. So I get people to box those ideas up. So literally draw lines around them so that they're isolated out from each other. And if you find the same idea appearing in more than one place, you may want to draw arrows between them to keep them all together. All right, so once you've boxed up the text and you've got them all isolated out, that's when you would want to start thinking, what is going on in this chunk of text? What is the writer saying? What they're saying here, how does that contribute to convincing the reader, the audience of this piece, to support the contention? What is it about this idea that's being expressed in this chunk of the text that is driving or pushing the reader towards the contention? Sometimes it can be quite difficult to figure that out because sometimes it's more like, I don't know, some background information or something like that. Sometimes it can be tricky, but you still, and to be honest, if you can't figure it out, don't write about it. Leave it out. There's going to be plenty there that you can write about. But what you're looking for is a strong reason that you can analyse in support of the contention. So once you figure that out, what you're looking for is thinking of a phrase where you've got, on the one hand, you've got, say here, the contention should be supported, and then think of because, and then the reason that chunk of the text gives. It might look like this. The reader should support the campaign against Coca-Cola, that's the contention, because, and then the first reason, Coca-Cola has been defying a legal directive to shut down its plant to avoid water loss and pollution. All right, that's actually the first reason that's given in the text, that Coke's breaking the law. They're not following the law. Okay, so if you're really clear on what your contention is, I've just got here, you might want to just jot in the margin or on a separate piece of paper. If you've written down what the contention is and you know what it is, just jot down, because I always use capitals because I'm trying to remind myself that all of these arguments must support the contention, and then give the reason or the part of it that supports the contention after because. Okay? So there are actually 6 main reasons in the text, and some of them are quite short. And let's have a look at the 6 main reasons here. I'll put them on, get them all onto the screen. Let's have a look at the 6 main reasons. Okay, they don't quite all fit on there, but I'll move it down. First one is the one I just mentioned, because Coca Cola has been defying a legal directive to shut down its plant to avoid water loss and pollution. So it's breaking the law. The second is because Coca Cola's actions are having a devastating effect on vulnerable villages. That's that impact. And if you have a look at the text, I'll show you here. I'll show you what that looks like. I've boxed it all up, and you'll see that it's color coded, so that some sections are in different colors. I've drawn boxes around them. I put some color in to make it clearer. And then just in the margins, I've just scribbled in my own mind impact on villages, or legal, or fight back, something to tell me about what that's about. And this is where I've extracted those ideas, and I've thought about what is it about that idea that's supporting the contention. Okay, so number 2 was Coca-Cola's actions are having a devastating effect on vulnerable villages, and I've reminded myself that the cartoon for this is highly related to that issue. It's sort of illustrating that issue. So I will probably discuss the cartoon when I discuss that particular point. The third one is because this is part of a pattern of dishonest and destructive behaviour on Coke's behalf. The fourth reason given is because the vulnerable and under-resourced villages have courageously tried to stand up to both Coca-Cola and their own government for some time now, and could do with some support. So that argument is about these poor people, they've fought so hard, we should back them up. And the fifth one is because joining together in people power is the only way to bring about change, and I thought I would discuss the petition box alongside that reason, because it relates very strongly to the petition box. And for the one above, the one about the fight back, I thought I'd discuss that photo, that black and white photo that appears at the top of the page. And you see I've just jotted those down next to the reasons, because I know I want to discuss all the visual elements, and these are the places that I feel like I'll discuss them. And if you notice on the actual, where I've marked up the sheet, the text, I've circled those visuals and drawn lines back to the part of the text that they are most closely associated with, and that will help me as I'm analysing the text to remember when I get to those points that I want to add in my analysis of those visuals. All right, and I'm just going to move up to number 6 now. Because the sixth reason is the most obscure of the reasons and probably the most difficult conceptually, is because through this campaign, it's possible and it's important to draw attention to broader connections between corporate production, so what businesses do when they produce goods, and behaviour, what businesses do in terms of how they relate to people and the environment. Consumption, that's what we do as people who drink Coke and use other products, and the impact of that consumption on the environment and on people. So the idea there is that this getting involved in this campaign helps to kind of wake up the world in a way to the connections between how we behave as consumers and how corporations behave around the world, and the impact that this has on vulnerable people, on vulnerable communities, and on the environment. So it's that sort of global perspective in a way. All right, just coming back to those visual elements and titles. So again, just to remind us that once the text is boxed up and you know what the main reasons are, and you've worked out how to express them all in words, just process all those visual elements and the title. I forgot to mention the title, and make sure that you can link them to something in the text and find one reason that they support and circle them and link them back to that reason. If you can do the title, hardly any students bring in the title. Usually it's a sentence at most, but it sort of helps to show that you've looked over the whole text, and it usually doesn't take much. The titles often have something to say that's quite good. Okay, so yeah, and I often note it in the margin of the I often scrawl in the margin to make notes about it and where I'm going to analyse it and I help myself. I might, coming down the margin, I might have photo written next to that part of the text just so that I remember I don't forget. It's not enough to just find the reasons and list them, although actually, to be honest, students who do that are probably past the middle point of how good they are. I think it's already quite a strong skill to be able to unpack what those reasons are in a text. But what really makes a great analysis is when those reasons themselves are unpacked and you're able to explain what it is about those reasons that is going to have some currency with this audience to achieve this purpose. So unpack and analyse the reasons themselves. And I often tell students that one of the ways to do this is to give each reason the so what test. So step back from the reason for a second and ask yourself, who cares whether Coke's breaking the law? Who cares whether they are dealing badly with people in vulnerable, weak, vulnerable villages in parts of the world? Who cares about the environment? Who cares about any of this kind of thing? Because all of these reasons tap into what the audience cares about, the beliefs, the value systems, the ideas of the audience. And students who are able to extract that and talk about that, unpack those reasons, are miles ahead of the middle of the pack. So look for the unstated premises that the reasons rest on, the hidden assumptions or beliefs. Many, and I've written that wrong there, many beliefs and views are so widely held that people barely even think about them. For example, the belief that we should be logical. Who ever thinks about whether that's a good idea to have or not? We just assume that everybody thinks logic is a good thing. But it's really something within our society that's generally very highly valued. It hasn't always been that case. Back in the Middle Ages, the church had enormous control over people. And if you were a scientist who was, like Galileo, for example, who was producing theories that defied the church's doctrine, you could find yourself in very deep trouble. And in fact, in the world today, there's a bit of a contest going on between where we get our knowledge from, how highly do we rank scientific, logical thinking over other ways of seeing the world. So when you encounter logic, talk about how the writer is using logic to target the reader's belief that things should make sense. Being fair, unpack that as well. We tend to assume that everybody thinks that things should be fair, but actually that's something that is very, very common in our modern democratic society, but certainly hasn't always been that way. Go back to Nazi Germany and you'll find that being fair was very, very low on their list of items to do with the way that things should be. Care for our families. It seems like that's just normal behaviour to care about your family. And in fact, of course, it is very widespread. But, it is quite specific. The way that we care about our families, the way that we want our children to be educated and to prosper in that way, that they should have individual rights and, all of that sort of stuff is quite specific to our society. If you went back, in time 300 or 400 or 500 years, children were often seen they might have still been loved, but they were also seen very much as commodities and the possession of families, in the possession of families and particularly fathers and so forth. So unpack it. That's all I'm saying. Just in a few lines, it targets the audience's belief that it's important to educate children or that children's rights matter or something along those lines. So just think, when you find a reason, what views, values, or beliefs underpin this reason? Why might the audience respond to the reason? And what views, values, or beliefs might this audience share that the writer is trying to target here? So often the writer and the reader will share a set of values, and the writer is trying to hone in on those values and really play upon them. All right, let's have a look at these 6 reasons now. And I've got a table here. It's not that I haven't filled the table out completely, and this document is available to you. So the idea is that you can then go back later and fill in the gaps for the other arguments and try your own analysis. But I've got the first example here. Because Coca Cola has been defying a legal directive to shut down its plant to avoid water loss and pollution, the belief this targets is that it's important to follow the law. So the assumption here is that the audience will agree with that and think that that is important, and so you can target that belief in your argument. And this is what it would sound like. The writer seeks to influence the reader by drawing attention to Coca-Cola's recent defiance of legal directives to stop its actions. This argument relies on the widely held view that it is important that corporations act according to the law, and that readers are likely to be concerned with information that Coca-Cola is acting outside the legal process. That's what that analysis would look like. For the second reason, I've just gone through and tapped in some beliefs that I think these arguments are hinging on. So the second one is more of an emotive argument, looking at how what a terrible effect this has on the villagers. And I think it really gets to this idea that a belief that the writer believes the audience will share, and that idea is that vulnerable people should not be exploited and they should be treated fairly. The third one, because this is part of a pattern of dishonest and destructive behaviour, the belief there is that corporations should behave honestly, and that if they don't, they should be held accountable for their dishonesty. The fourth one is because the vulnerable and under-resourced villagers have courageously tried to stand up to Coca-Cola and their own government and could do with some support. This was a bit harder for me, but I think underneath it all, there is a belief there that we should stand up for people who need help, especially courageous people who are vulnerable, standing up for the little people and support people if they're trying to make a change and so forth. I found that one a bit harder. The fifth one, people power. The idea that people power is the only way to make change. Well, underneath that, I think the idea that change is good is an assumption that the reader will want things to change. The idea that people joining together will be stronger than individuals alone. And I think also there's this assumption there that ordinary people might feel they lack power as individuals to do anything. So to some extent, this idea is about inspiring people and helping them to believe that it is possible to do something if only they would get together with others. And here, look, we've got this great opportunity for you to jump in and join us and everything, make it easy for you. And the sixth one, the complicated one, about drawing attention to and connecting up different problems around the world. I think the underlying beliefs there are that it's important to improve things on a global scale, so you need to have that kind of internationalist perspective. I think it assumes that people will see or be prepared to see that there are interconnected systemic issues that the world faces, and that there is a connection between the environment and about the behaviour of business and that sort of thing. And also the idea that knowledge and understanding will help overcome these problems. So that idea of illuminating and casting light on things. And just generally that the world's problems are interconnected with each other and need to be seen that way instead of seeing them as separate. All right. Okay, now you'll notice I haven't mentioned persuasive techniques, and I'm all the way into this video. Well, a lot of students make the mistake of doing the persuasive techniques first, or thinking that persuasive techniques is what this task is all about. I like to think of the analysis of persuasive techniques as like the icing that goes on a cake. Now, if you did not have a cake first and you then got your icing and put it on a plate, no one would want to eat it. All right? The icing is something that will jazz up and make your dish look spectacular and fantastic. But without the cake, it's kind of lacking in all substance and attachment to the issue. So, what I really want you to do is you must analyze persuasive techniques as part of this task. You must be able to find some in the text, and you must be able to offer analysis, but that analysis must be connected to the ideas in the piece. And so, what I'm suggesting that you do is that because you've boxed your text up and you've got boxes, look for the persuasive techniques that are inside the box and think about those techniques as being part of that idea, part of trying to support and enhance and jazz up and make that particular idea seem stronger and more effective. Okay, so I'm asking you to start with the idea and then go to how the idea, you'll see here, you've got the reason. The reader should join the campaign because, and what that reason is. Then how does that reason have an impact on the reader, and why? What view or value or belief does it target or rely upon? And then go to some of the persuasive techniques that appear with that idea alongside it as part of it. And you then do a specific analysis of how that persuasive idea then enhances the impact of the idea. So in this table, I've got that text that I had before. The writer seeks to influence the reader by drawing attention to Coca Cola's recent defiance of the legal directive. So you keep that. And I've got 3 quotes that came from that opening section of the text. And then I found those 3 persuasive techniques, and they are determined to drain dry, which is alliteration, the use of that repeating first sound of those words, and then the violating pollution limits. I thought that was also some strong language there, and here comes the analysis of that. This opening argument is highlighted. So see how I'm attaching this to the opening argument, and this analysis of the language stems from that opening argument, is highlighted with the use of alliteration, and that's the common way that alliteration is used, which is designed to alarm and confront the reader and emphasise that Coke is making a deliberate choice to flout the government order and act outside the law, something that a modern readership is likely to disapprove of. Okay, so you see how I'm trying to link the technique to what the writer is actually trying to say here in the argument that they're trying to make. Then I go on to my second piece of evidence. You don't need to have 2 pieces, but I've used 2 here. Use of the phrase violating pollution limits with the word violating having an association with sexual assault is designed to encourage a negative reaction from readers as they are positioned to see, and you can't just stop with a negative reaction from readers. You've got to say why and how this supports this idea that's being developed here, as they are positioned to see Coke's actions as violent, aggressive, intrusive, unwanted, and disrespectful, which are all kind of ideas that have that connotation or association with sexual assault and violation. All right. So the trick here then for you guys is to, if you use this table, is to include your analysis of the idea and then some analysis of the persuasive technique. I've added in here also title and cartoon, because you can add in the title and the cartoon and any other images. They become just other persuasive techniques that you can then add your analysis to. And there's no limit to how many persuasive techniques you can do for each idea. But you may, your essay may become enormously long if you try to do all of them. So just be selective. I had 2 for this one, and that was maybe even a little bit long. You'll see what it looks like as a paragraph. So this is what the paragraph would look like. It's 155 words just on that one idea. And remember, we've got 6 ideas in this text. So you'll see how very, very quickly you'll get a very, very long essay. So you probably want to try and go maybe just one technique for each one, okay? So that is the kind of way, the method that I would use to go through a text. It involves finding the contention, finding the key reasons, understanding how the key reasons work, why they're likely to be persuasive to an audience on this issue. And only when you've been able to figure all that out do you then look to the persuasive techniques that go along with those reasons and do some analysis of how those techniques contribute to those reasons. Okay? So that's how I do it. And I know there are other ways of going about doing it, but for me, that works. All right? So good luck with it. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but, the more practice you have, the better and stronger you'll get. Thanks, everyone.